What is the camera setting on? Okay. This morning, Maryruth is going to give her testimony. I want to thank the Lord for that she is here, that she has been able to explain a lot of things about health that I never understood before, and I know that others haven't. And so I just want to turn the time over to Maryruth, and God will be with her, that they will guide and direct her in all of her speech. And I thank you so much for being here.
in a proper manner. And so what happens is that we can end up damaging our kidneys.
You got it?
Okay. So hopefully that will help. So this morning, I'm going to share a little bit of my story. And the reason I'm sharing is because I'm giving a lot of information that people might not believe works. Because we have been so well indoctrinated by the germ theory and all of the, if something's wrong, we got to go to the doctor. We got to take this pill, our monthly pills. And I want to share with you a bit about my own experience. Because everything I teach, I have proven in my own life that it does work. I have proven it over and over with the people that I've worked with over the years. I know it works. So that is why I am sharing my story today. So I am the oldest of 3 girls. I had an alcoholic father. He was abusive. It is only through the grace of God that I didn't end up strung out on drugs. When I was 8 years old, he offered me cocaine. There was an incident. I was 8. And my parents were separated. And he had come over, and I took my 2 sisters upstairs. My youngest sister was just a baby. Took them upstairs to get him away from him because he was not sober. And it got quiet. And I thought, I better go check on my mother. So I started down the stairs, and my mother comes running around the corner and up the stairs, and she hides behind me. I was 8 years old, and she hid behind me. And my father comes running after her, and he has a butcher knife in his hands. And he stops when he sees me. And I looked at him. I said, "You get out of here. So I don't want to see you until you straighten yourself up. Get out." He didn't say a word. He just put the knife down, turned around and walked off. And I didn't see him. I don't even remember how long it was before I saw him again. But I have to tell you the good news that my father did sober up. He had 16 years sober when he died. I started praying for my father when I was 4. 2 months before he died, in his late 60s, he accepted Christ as his Savior. I cannot tell you how I felt. It's amazing. A few years later, my mother, I got a call, and they said, "You need to come see her because she's not expected to last another month." She had dementia, and she was in a care center. So I was in school at that time, and spring break was coming up. So drove straight through from Idaho to Texas. Took us 2 days. I stayed 2 days to visit, and we had to drive back for 2 days. But while I was there, my mother at first, she was very, very confused. And I was in the room with her, and everyone else left, and it was just me. And then suddenly she came to herself and she said, "Oh, you did come see me, didn't you?" And I said, "Mother, I told you I would be here. I didn't think you would." And then she said, "Please," she's just started, "please forgive me. Please forgive me. I'm so sorry." And I told her, I said, "I have forgiven you a long time ago." And what she was asking for forgiveness for is when I was 6th grade, I guess. She had divorced my dad, and she remarried another alcoholic who did not like me. And I will freely admit I was a self-righteous little twerp, truly. But he just could not stand me. And I would tell him, I said, "You're going to burn in hell." I was a really, I had just been saved that summer. Baptized, I should say. I accepted Christ when I was younger, but I was baptized that year. And I was a little full of it. You know how we can get sometimes. So my mother took me to my paternal grandparents and said, "You need to take her, or she goes to a girls' home." She chose him over me. And my grandparents did take me in, and I lived there until I graduated high school. It was not a very positive experience, but God kept his hands on me. But my last visit to my mom, everyone had cleared the room, and she became aware, and she was asking me to forgive her. And I told her I forgave her. And she was just very agitated. You know, all of these sins that she was remembering. And I said, "Mother, would you like me to pray with you and ask Jesus to forgive those sins?" And she looked at me and she said, "Oh, please, please help me pray." So I was able to pray with my mom. And you know what? Her clarity of mind only lasted another 15 minutes. And then everyone came back in, and she wasn't really aware of me anymore. Until a few months later, I was back home, back going to school, and I would call on the phone. And she had, my stepfather had taken her out of the home that she was in. And she actually started getting better. And she managed to live almost a year later. But we had many, many conversations over that time. And it was like she had a lot of peace because she had faith that she had been forgiven. I felt that God had blessed me with this experience. Amazing, amazing. And I fully believe that both of my parents will be in heaven. So I had a sickly childhood. I was going to the doctor every month. I would have just general yucky, flu-like symptoms. They couldn't ever figure out what was wrong with me. And finally, the doctor told them, she's just making it up for attention. You don't need to be bringing her in. So later, years later, looking back, what I realized is that I probably had Lyme disease back then because I was always picking ticks off of me. Excuse me. And the doctors just didn't think of it. There was a couple of incidences when I was like 7 to 8 years old. I don't really remember which dream came first. But there was one time I was very, very, very sick. I was too sick to go to the hospital. The doctor said it is too dangerous, as sick as she is right now, for us to put her in the hospital. So you need to keep her at home and, all of this stuff. I can still see it so clearly in my head. I can see my bed, the way it arranged the room. During that night, I had a dream. And in my dream, the room tilted like this. My bed was already here, and everything was sliding this way except for one chair that was in the corner. And I remember in my dream thinking, I need to get to that chair for safety. So I would look down, and I looked up, and there was Jesus in that chair. And I got to get to Jesus. I got to get to Jesus. And I was trying to climb up the floor because it was at such a steep. And then I remember seeing him and thinking, I need to get to Jesus. And looking down, trying to figure out, I looked up again, and he was gone. When I woke up the next morning, I was completely well. I didn't have any symptoms whatsoever. And I know that God touched me. God healed me. There was another dream I had. I was 8. It was during the week of Vacation Bible School. And it was a Friday night because I remember we were going to have a special program Sunday morning, and we did not meet Saturday. Okay, this is a Baptist church that I went to Vacation Bible School at for years. So that night, I had a dream that I was at Calvary. And I saw things. The dark clouds, the earthquake, all this stuff, all these people running fearful when the earth was shaking. And I was just standing there looking at Jesus on the cross. And I woke up. And I tried to share what I had dreamt about with my Vacation Bible School teachers. They wouldn't even listen to me. So I was 8. Say 20 years ago, I was at SAC taking life and teaching from Dr. Underhill. And we read The Desire of Ages. And I got to the scene describing Calvary. And I'd read it the night before, and I came into class early the next morning. I was crying. And I opened that book. I said, Dr. Underhill, I dreamt this when I was 8 years old. And he said, tell me about it. He didn't tell me, oh, you're just making things up. I had never, ever heard the crucifixion story other than the fact that Jesus died on the cross. I had never heard any details. I had never had the story read to me. There was no way I could have just made that up. So I told him about it, and he said, I believe you. And he said, you were given a special gift. Don't forget it. And I have never forgotten that dream. I have never forgotten that dream. And every time I read the closing scenes of Desire of Ages, I'm like, oh, Lord, thank you so much for making this real to me. Because you know what? It's easy to read the Bible, and we read it so often that we just sort of skim over the words, and we don't think about them. We do the same thing when we read the Desire of Ages so many times. Oh, we've already read through this. Look, I got all these passages underlined. But we don't think about what they represent. And I remember seeing him on that cross and thinking, it was my sins that put him there. Mine. Life-changing. Life-changing. And after that, I started asking more questions of my granny. Because my granny taught me about Bible reading, my maternal grandmother. She taught me the importance of reading this Bible every day, and about prayer, and about living what you say you believe. Something else that started when I was 8 years old, I attended a very, very small church, very small church. And I started teaching the Sunday school class for the kindergartners. There were like 3 kids, and I was the teacher. It's so funny. Other things, I taught myself how to read when I was 4. We only had 2 books in our house. One was Dick and Jane, and the other was a parent encyclopedia. And my mother would read Dick and Jane to me every day, and I memorized it. So I would sit, and because I memorized it, I would go through and I would teach myself to recognize the words. And I was reading before I knew it. I taught myself to read. A little bit later, so that was about 4. By the time I was 6, I was reading the parent encyclopedia. And I had found out some things that caused me to distrust some of the things I had heard, been told. So, but it was very interesting. And I think about it now when, as an adult, to me, having books is very, very important. Having access to books. And so when my kids were little, man, they had books. My grandkids, they have books. To me, if you can read, you can learn almost anything. I enjoyed playing school for fun. I would be teacher And I would set up all my stuffed animals, and I'd get my sister and my cousins, and we would have school. Later, when I got a little older, I went from teaching school to preaching. And I would baptize my siblings and cousins. I wanted to be a missionary to Africa because I thought that was the only place there were missionaries. And I wanted to go to Africa and tell people about Jesus, and I wanted to write children's books. I never knew, here years later, I have written children's books. I have a whole series about Shaboom the teddy bear, and he learns about God through the adventures with his little girl he belongs to, called Renee, named Renee. Anyways, in March of 2020, the world changed, didn't it? And by summertime, I was giving Bible studies and training presentations to people in Kenya. And I was like, wow, here I am. I'm being a missionary to Africa. And even today, I still give training presentations to people I know in Kenya and even Norway. So God has blessed by having those dreams, those desires to come true. And I've been teaching forever, it seems like. And I don't think I will stop teaching until my brain stops working, which hopefully it will not stop working. So when I was at my paternal grandparents, they were not a touchy-feely person. My mother, every day, just hugs, and she was always telling you that she loved you. And I was used to that. Then I go to my grandparents. I lived there 8 years. No I love yous, no hugs. I had one hug, and that was 1980, during that 100 days of 100-plus temperatures. Someone tried to kidnap me, and I ended up being burned on my feet because I was barefoot, and they were dragging me down in the car. I was running, trying to get away, and I finally took and bit them, and they threw me out. So I was not kidnapped, but I ended up with second-degree burns on the bottom of my feet. That was the only time in 8 years that I got a hug and an I love you. 1980. I was, 15-ish. But years later, I was blessed to learn about love languages. Okay? At that time, I learned about the love language of gifts. Almost every day that I lived with my grandparents, my grandmother, I would come home and there would be something on the bed for me. There would be clothing. Now, when I first moved there, I was in a t-shirt and shorts and an old house coat that was too short. And that's all I had. And she would buy me clothes 2 or 3 days a week, sometimes even 4 days a week. And then she would buy me things. I never knew that this was her way of showing me love. It wasn't my love language. but it was her love language, and it's how she expressed her love for me. But I was much older before I realized that. But before she died, we were able to reconnect. I know that if it had not been for my grandmother, I would not have finished high school, much less been able to go to college. You know, there's a lot of things. When I first moved in with her and my grandfather, I didn't know squat. I didn't even know how to keep myself clean. I didn't even know how to make a bed. I didn't know anything about taking care of myself. And she taught me. She taught me. So yeah, she wasn't very demonstrative in the hugs, but she gave me love in other ways. So I graduated, and I got married, and I had a baby girl. And then 18 months later, I had a boy, my oldest son. When my daughter was 6 months old, it was April, and we had just watched, my husband and I had just watched the 10 Commandments. And he started asking me all these questions. And I was telling him about the secret rapture and all the stuff. How if we missed the rapture, then we were going to suffer persecution for 7 years, and then we were going to be guillotined. So during my high school years, those films, those Left Behind series movies had come out. And I had a lot of friends that went to this great big Baptist church. And they asked me to come watch these movies with them. And I did. And I tell you what, scared me to death. My last year as a senior, this is as a junior. So in my junior year, I stayed the summer with a friend and her very large family. And one day I had come home from work, and I walked in, and nobody was there. That never happened. Nobody was there. I didn't think anything of it. I went in, I took a nap, I got up, it was a bit later, and there was still nobody there. Immediately, you know where my mind went? I'd missed the rapture. I was terrified. I sat there crying and crying and crying, begging God to forgive me and to help me stay strong, even if I was going to be guillotined. I cried, I don't know how long, and then people started arriving, and they were like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, laughing and crying. I said, "Oh, I thought I'd missed the rapture." Well, when I got married, I hadn't been married very long, when we got a flyer for a prophecy seminar. I want to tell you that God is so merciful, because the first flyer he sent our way, I called my granny. And she says, "Oh, stay away from those people." File 13. I didn't think twice. And then it was the next April that we got another flyer right after we had been watching the Ten Commandments. And I called them. I said, do you have to join a church? No. Okay. And so I got a babysitter and we went. That was over 40 years ago. And I tell you what, I am so thankful that God kept after me. He kept after me. You know, before I learned the truth about the Sabbath, I kept Sunday as Sabbath. I didn't work. I spent the afternoon reading my Bible. I didn't go shopping or anything like that. I kept Sunday as Sabbath to the best of my understanding because no one had ever told me anything. I had just was going with what I read in the Bible and was trying to understand as an 18, 19-year-old. When I learned about Saturday as the Sabbath, the concept wasn't hard because I already knew about the Sabbath. But it was really hard to make the change because at first, Saturday was my work day to catch up on everything. But after we'd been in the church for a few months, I realized that, you know what? This actually works better because you have your day of rest and then you have Sunday as a day of work. I can catch up all my work around the house before I go to my weekly work. So at first, when the kids were little, I was like, oh no, it's almost Sabbath. I am not going to get things done. But now it's like, oh man, Sabbath's almost here. I can't wait. It truly has become my favorite day of the week. And I no longer stress about it. You know, I do the best I can. And because that's the thing. We are trusting in God for provision. I do the best I can through the week. I'm going to trust Him that He's going to do what needs to be done. I don't have to worry about it. I truly feel sorry for people who do not observe the Sabbath because it's such a blessing. God gave it to us to bless us. And people miss out. So when my kids, well, after number 1 and 2, and before 3 came around, I started college at Southwestern Adventist College. And I started with regular attendance on classes, and then I got pregnant in my second semester. And I changed to their adult degree program, which was sort of like a precursor for virtual classes. Attended there for another year when my third child was born. And then I transferred to Texas Women's, and I earned my degree in deaf education. When I was at SAC, I took all my professional classes. So when I went to Denton, I had to take all my undergraduate, all my basics, in addition to my professional classes. So I ended up graduating with one class lacking a double major. You know, going forward in time, we had some struggles in the marriage. There was a lot of emotional abuse. But I was determined to stick it out, no matter what. Unfortunately, today, we do not teach our young people the signs of a potential abuser. We don't. And I remember I was sitting in school one day taking a sociology class, and they were talking about domestic violence and the signs of domestic violence. And I started bawling. And I said, why don't they teach us this in high school? Why don't they teach us this? Since then, I created a class to do exactly that. Not just about domestic violence, but about how to have healthy relationships. Anyways, one day, I saw my son began treating me as his daddy did. And I realized that I was teaching my children that this was normal. So I went and I filed. But then I changed my mind. But then my husband did something that almost destroyed me emotionally, but moved me forward in my divorce. He moved out and moved in with another woman. So I thought I would be blasted at church, but instead, several people came up and they said, "What took you so long? What took you so long?" I did not realize that they were noticing what was happening. Today, if I saw something like that, I would speak out. It would have been good to have them speak out to me. I was a young mother, and even though they were very supportive when I finally did file, there were years that I attended that church, and they were observing this behavior, and nothing was done. Nothing was said. This is wrong. This is wrong. Something needs to be said when church members observe any type of abuse or habitual sin. Church, we need to speak out. So after the divorce, I went through some really, really tough depression. And I made some bad choices, but God protected me. I ended up in Indiana for a short term when I tried to end things. I experienced depression during high school too and tried to commit suicide. So it wasn't a new thing in my mind. But when I was in Indiana, my friend, she got me to the hospital. And this was a private hospital, and there was a Christian nurse working there. And she shared with me Jeremiah 29:11. And there was another person who came, and they had song service Sunday mornings. And I thought, well, I'll just go. It wasn't even a Bible reading. All they did was sing songs. And I thought, I can go to it. And they sung this song, Because He Lives. I had never heard that song before. And of course, I started bawling. But that song and that verse is what I needed. And God blessed me, and I was able to move forward in my life, and I never attempted suicide again. Not that I did not make some more stupid choices, but I never again attempted suicide. So I returned to Texas to work and tried to develop a new normal. I was adjusting to life, and I started working outside the home full time. And in the mid-90s, I went out with someone that did not take no for an answer. And I ended up pregnant with my youngest child. You know, I really thought Satan was going to win in destroying me then. I started having problems with agoraphobia. I couldn't go anywhere without having panic attacks. But you know what? The church I was attending, they were so supportive. The women just came around me and supported me and loved on me. They even threw me a baby shower. Because by this time, my kids were like 14. My youngest was 9, okay? So 14 to 9 years old. And then the baby was born. So what Satan used to try to destroy me, God used to bless me even more abundantly. He used this event as a tipping point that changed my whole life, eventually bringing me to where I am today. It has not been an easy path. After this event, I developed an elbow problem. And I know that if it hadn't been for my daughter calling the ambulance, I would not have made it through the night this one particular night. But God again intervened. When the doctor told me, when I was in ER and I came to, the doctor told me that if it hadn't been for her, I would have died from alcohol poisoning. And that scared me. I only drank just a short bit of time, but when I drank, it was by the bottle. It's been over, 22 years now. I went through DTs really, really bad. But God continued to protect me and provide. You know, God tells us that all things work for the good of them that love Him. He means exactly that. When my youngest was about 4, he started demonstrating some challenging issues. And it wasn't until he was 9 that he was given 11 diagnoses. And I was told by the professionals that he would never be able to function as a normal adult. I stood up, I looked that doctor in the eyes, and I said, "You don't know his mama, and you don't know his God." And I walked out. We need to be careful never to allow a diagnostic label to box us in, either as an adult or especially with a child. Those labels are only to give us the tools that we need. So because of the experience I had in a 12-step program and my deaf education, I developed a mindset of whatever it takes. And I took that mindset and I turned it to my son. And I started researching and researching and researching. And I started learning about the effect of diet and behavior. So my son is 28 years old now. They told me that he would never be able to function, and when I got tired of taking care of him, I could put him in a group home. He's 28, he's married, he's working in the career of his choice. He actually works with young people who have challenges. But for the grace of God. You know, one time he had gone to some event, he came home and he says, Mom, he said, today I saw some kids that have the same labels that I do. He said, but they can't do anything. He said, thank you for what you made me do. Because he didn't like some of the things I was doing. And one time he asked me, we were driving back from Pathfinders, and he says, Mom, do you ever regret that I was not born normal? I looked at him and I said, no. I said, having you had been one of the biggest blessings in my life. Because of you, I am a better person. I'm a better mother. I'm a better teacher. I'm a better advocate. I'm a better sister. I'm a better daughter. If God had not blessed me with you, I would have missed out so much of what I needed to learn to become more like Him. And I tell you what, it was not easy. It was not easy. We battled often. I used to tell one of my kids, I said, the reason God gave you to me because you cannot out-stubborn me. Oh, man. Oh, man, I tell you. So because of my experience with my son, when he got to be 12-ish, 13, I returned to school. I'd been out of school for a long time, but I returned to school and I earned my master's in mental health counseling with play therapy certification. I worked during my internship. I worked at a residential treatment center for women and children, the homeless women and children. And I often had the hardest clients placed on my caseload. And one time someone asked me about that. They said, why? And I said, because it's my experiences that they need to hear about. They need to know what God can do in their lives. I love the 2 Corinthians 1, 3-4, when it talks about when we're going through something and we have God helping us, we need to share that with others. We're supposed to share our stories. Because when we do that, others can say, if he did it for her, he can do it for me. So I mentioned agoraphobia earlier, and one of the things that one of the tools that God brought into my life when I had agoraphobia was Toastmasters. Toastmasters is a speaking and leadership organization. It's worldwide, and I've been in Toastmasters for over 15 years. But they took me when I couldn't even look at anyone to talk. I couldn't go around strangers without having a panic attack. And God blessed me. And now I have an opportunity to speak at all sizes of audiences and stuff, even people around the world, sharing about His healing methods. There's a lot. There's a lot. You know, but what I want to share in closing was that I mentioned about being a sickly child. I was sick all the time. It was not until 2012, the fall of 2012, that I was finally properly diagnosed with Lyme disease. God blessed by giving me a low-cost protocol, and I started getting better. And now, here it's been a number of years, and I am like 98% symptom-free. Okay, a lot of times Lyme disease will masquerade itself as flu symptoms. Okay, so achiness. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, lupus, Sjogren's, chronic fatigue syndrome, MS, and that's just physical. That's not the mental head stuff, that all my labels I had with that. The thing is that doctors, like we talked about last night, they don't look at the underlying cause. They just label the symptoms. But before I started making the lifestyle changes, I couldn't walk without a cane or a walker. I was in constant 9 to 10 pain. I had no memory. I had trouble writing. I had developed dyslexia even, so I had trouble reading. Things would flip-flop on the page, and I was like, I couldn't even read. I read. That's all. I've always been a reader since I taught myself when I was 4 years old. But I had developed acquired dyslexia. And I couldn't even remember. I'd have to ask my son, how do you spell and? How do you spell to? How do you spell cat? I could not remember. And I had a photographic memory. And I couldn't remember. I had, restless legs syndrome. I had all sorts of gut issues. I can't even remember all the things. It's sort of hard now when someone's talking to me about their symptom, I'm going, oh yeah, I remember, I went through that too. But now it's hard to remember everything. POTS, P-O-T-S, it's a heart condition where the wiring of the heart is messed up. And so your blood pressure will drop suddenly. I couldn't even walk to the bathroom by myself. I had to have my son help me to the bathroom. He'd help me in, shut the door, stand there until I'm done, and then he would help me back to the living room where I could sit down. If I was going to go somewhere, I couldn't take a shower and go somewhere both the same day because I didn't have the energy. If I took a shower, that wiped me out for the rest of the day. I couldn't walk. I had trouble speaking. My hearing, I have been hard of hearing for a long time. I almost went blind. I'd lost my color. I'd lost my color vision. I'd lost my depth perception, my peripheral vision. I had to wear these special glasses with little telescope type things on them. I was not allowed to drive for a number of months. But I started just one thing at a time. I started with diet. I lost a bunch of weight. The gut issues started getting better. My pain dropped. I stopped having flares. I would have a flare where it would put me down for days every 2 weeks or so, a couple of times a month. But now, the only thing I still experience is sensitivity to chemicals and electromagnetic frequencies, EMFs. But it's not anything like it used to be, because I still can function. I might, be a little stiff. I'll get a headache if I'm around a 5G tower, and I'll get nauseated. If I'm real close to a lot of towers, then I'll have trouble walking. But I am amazed at the graciousness of God and the way He has restored my health. Not everyone with Lyme disease has the level of healing that I experience and that I enjoy now. And sometimes I'm like, why, God? Why not them? Why me? But not everyone is as willing to be as diligent with their eating. I don't like pain. I don't. So I do everything I can to avoid it. So I'm very careful with what I eat. So when we talk about these things, and like later we'll be talking about food and behavior, about the brain health, I want you to remember that everything I am teaching you, I have lived. I know it works. And I truly believe that if we are to walk in obedience to God's health and moral laws, then He heals. To an extent that we cannot imagine. I have not been to a doctor in years. In the past, I was taking 15 medications multiple times a day. I got up to almost 300 pounds. God didn't give up on me. I was told I would never be able to work again, that I just needed to accept it. But they don't know my God. They don't know my God. Well, when I started researching about Lyme disease, they said, get out of the box, start eating real food, remove gluten and dairy. And so I started that. It's a long story there. I'm not going to get to it. But when I did that, symptoms started subsiding. Weight. I lost 35 pounds in like 8 weeks. I mean, it just dropped off me. I started sleeping better. I started because I had to take 2 naps during the day just to get through the day, and I'd be in bed asleep by 7 o'clock. But I started not needing my naps. My pain went down. I started getting energy. My thoughts started clearing up. I started being able to remember things. My restless legs syndrome went away. My vision started improving. Now, I was told I would be blind and deaf by the time I reached my mid-50s. Okay?
How old were you when all these symptoms started?
Oh, in my early 20s. Yeah, it took 35 years to get a proper diagnosis. But now, I don't wear prescription glasses. I have readers, and I don't even need them all the time, just sometimes, especially like when the solar flares are high, then my eyes will be a little blurry. But nothing. Used to, I couldn't even go into a store because the chemicals would just hit me, and I'd be unable to walk. I would have to, use the cart to lean on. And my son would have to stand right beside me to get everything because I couldn't let go of the cart. It would take a month to run 3 or 4 errands. And now I can run errands all day. Used to just a couple of steps, all I could do without a walker or a cane. But now I can walk as long as I need. I can even carry a backpack. A lot of people that, when I tell them about having to use a walker or something, they're like, I can't imagine that. But it's true. I had one like that with a seat, so I could turn it around and sit in it. I had degenerative arthritis in every vertebra of my back. I was so much pain. So much pain. And because I was allergic to medications, the doctors couldn't give me anything. MS. Y'all know what MS looks like. That was one of my diagnoses. I had trouble. I couldn't even hold a glass. I had to start using plastic because I was always dropping. Plastic with a lid. I would spill food on me all the time because I had trouble just putting the food in my mouth. So the things that I've experienced, what I do is I use them to connect with others. Because they'll come to me and they'll say, well, I've done this. I know, I understand. I've been there. Let me tell you what God has done for me. I will never take my health for granted. And I will close with one thing. When we talk about the no buy, no sell, it's concerned me because how would I get the nutrients, my supplements that I use for my health? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? I'm not going to be able to manage. Well, I want to tell you something. In July, when I packed up most of my health supplements because I thought it's only going to be a short time. I'll be okay. And I had just the basics. Well, those basics, when I left the mobile home, that box ended up being put in storage by mistake. So it's been 5 months since I've had my complete protocol. And God has sustained me. He has sustained me in ways I never imagined. And you know what? I'm still not getting sick when everyone around me is. Yeah, I have a little bit of stiffness sometimes that I usually don't have because I'm taking these nutrients like boron and stuff. But I'm still able to work. I'm able to walk, whatever I need. I'm able to think, and I'm able to write, and I can still teach. So now I no longer worry because I believe that God will sustain me. If He chooses to allow me to live toward that time, I know that He will sustain me. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I just thank you so much for your love and your mercy. Thank you for your sustaining grace. Thank you for all that you have taught us and that you are yet waiting to teach us when we want it bad enough. And Lord, I pray that whoever listens to this today, that you will use it to bless, and that they will be able to see that whatever you have done for me, you can do for them. Help us, Lord, to continue to walk in obedience to your health and moral laws. Lord, give us the strength. Help us to keep our focus on you, because times ahead are going to be really, really hard. And we cannot do it on our own. So we ask you, Lord, to complete the work in us and fit us for heaven. In Jesus' precious name, amen.